So what is a psychological injury? To put it in the most basic terms, a psychological injury is when you are emotionally or mentally harmed due to a workplace incident or something that has happened in the workplace that has caused you emotional or mental harm. The workplace incident could have been a stressor or a trauma, or essentially you've been in this unsafe working environment. And when I say unsafe, that doesn't mean to jump immediately to your physical environment. This is also emotionally, mentally. Even when people think about working from home, working remote, even isolation is also a risk of harm to an employee or to a worker as well. For something to happen in the workplace and for something to actually be labeled as a psychological injury must basically mean that the injury is ultimately affecting the overall well-being and the day-to-day functioning of the individual and their ability to perform their overall job in an effective way. A psychological injury can happen from one single traumatic event, or it can happen over a period of time due to several events and then builds up a chronic condition and results in a psychological injury at the end of this. So the most common types of psychological injuries are anxiety disorders. So for example, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. This is, in my case, what I experienced and what I went through. So I had to go through several psychologists and psychiatrists to essentially get to this diagnosis. I will get to that in some later videos of how I went through that process, how I overcame that. I also want to give hope to those people too that I personally overcame the PTSD very holistically, and I didn't take any medications, went through my whole healing journey very holistically. And so I want to also give hope, to those who are also going through the PTSD, that there are many different alternatives and routes that you can take to, during your healing process. Some of the most common symptoms of PTSD are hypervigilance or being really easily startled. Flashbacks and nightmares is probably the most common one of PTSD. Not being able to sleep, having sleep difficulties, being very, very on edge, being very socially anxious, so having fears of going out into your normal social interactions, such as your workplace with your friends, or maybe at your local bar or gym club or whatever it is you would normally go to, and having more anxiety around everyday places that you would normally feel safe to go to, and emotional detachment, emotional numbness as well. A lot of people may be surprised by this, but burnout is a psychological injury. So if you are being overworked and you are emotionally drained, emotionally exhausted, you just do not have the capacity for anything, that's a very, very common psychological injury that people walking around having no idea that this is in fact due to the workplace. Anxiety disorders in general, in a generalized sense, so this is excessive fear, this is non-stop racing thoughts and anxiousness, and not being able to focus or concentrate on your work, on your hobby, on your whatever's in front of you due to what has been happening in the workplace. And again, there are so many different occurrences or examples of what could cause a psychological workplace injury. Being overworked and not being given enough support in your role. So a lack of support, a lack of direction, a lack of purpose, a lack of encouragement, which pushes someone into potentially depression, anxiety disorder, potential PTSD, depending on the person. So there are all these things that the company, the managers, the leaders need to be very aware of, but these videos are for the worker. So other work conditions that we feel unsafe in, or we have this uneasiness in. So bullying is a big one. Obviously bullying, sexual harassment, sexual assault. We know how our systems work. We know what happens usually when we do speak up. A lot of the time, unfortunately, things are brushed under the rug, they're forgotten about, And that is why most women especially don't say anything, or we have this fear of losing our role or being demoted or being discriminated against in the job position that we have, or who we're placed in teams with, or the amount of stories I have of discrimination due to someone speaking up about something and then suddenly they're being bullied and discriminated against is just not good enough. These can all contribute to depression, anxiety disorders, and chronic fatigue and chronic burnout, which leads to other very serious health conditions if left untreated, if left unhealed. Unfortunately for many people, and this is why I'm making these videos, is many people leave a workplace traumatized. They will quit and leave a company, or usually they leave a person or several people that have mismanaged them, or unfortunately led incompetently, or without proper processes and procedures in place that has allowed the person to feel unsafe, feel unseen, unheard. They quit, they leave traumatized, they leave with a bad taste in their mouth, they leave with potentially, burnt bridges or potential risks of burning bridges within their industry. And then they now have this fear of going into or working for another person or working for another company. And for many, many people, it may not be within this current workplace, with these current traumatic events that are happening, or the bullying or the harassment, or the lack of support, or the lack of compassion for and empathy, these basic, what I personally consider basic human skills such as empathy, which unfortunately a lot of leaders do not have. And so people feel unseen, they feel unheard, they feel useless, at a loss, and fall into a depression or move on to the next place. And then over time, what happens is they're starting to now develop a chronic illness based on all of these small workplace incidences or events that are stacking up and adding up over time. And that in itself, for example, is also another example of PTSD, or in more cases CPTSD, complex PTSD. If you've come to the end of this video, thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe and follow this series, and I really just hope that it helps you, or it helps someone that needs this process, is going through something very similar. Also just seeking some hope at the very least, to know that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and prioritize your healing first. And then if you choose and you think that it is the right decision for you to go down a legal pathway, then I support you all the way. And I hope that these videos are a guide for you to have something to actually go to find the information, because my question for the last decade in many companies has been, where do I even start? Who do I even go to? What do I even do? Thank you for watching to the end. Please subscribe. I'll see you in the next video.